So, we will take up the topic number 55 and 56. So, our mind should be clear when it is pure, when we are a seeker. Then seeker asks a question that how the individual self and the supreme self is one, or the real self and the supreme self is one. So we have to understand clearly, as we started our Mangala Charan, that consciousness, if it is one, consciousness is only one, all pervading, one reality, then if I go and worship a God outside me, and that God is an object, and any object is inert, it's matter, it's material. And when I say God is above me, he cannot be matter. And if the God is a matter, then there is no need to worship the matter. So that question needs to be understood clearly. So one master makes a statement that if you say the God means he, even if in the human form, he is full of knowledge and we are full of ignorance. So he knows the essential nature. I don't know my essential nature. So when I know my essential nature, I see there is hardly any difference between the God and me. So perhaps the mind due to the ignorance says, because he is all knowing, that is why you are above me. So at the outer level, it is only at the external level we see God is different than the real self. So we need to analyze and reflect on it to find out whether the real self and the supreme self are two or one. So there are many ways of doing it. Every master has a different approach. But obviously those approaches brings us to the same thing, that we all are essentially one. See, one example, I was just giving a lesson before you. We have to understand that ignorance. When we say ignorance, what it means?
Wrong knowledge.
Wrong knowledge, yes. So now this mouse is hidden by my palm. So I say, where is the mouse? So the mouse is already present, but it is hidden. Because it is hidden, so I don't know it, so it is also ignorance. That is the nature of the ignorance we talk about in Eastern wisdom. Do you know it real self? No, I don't know. Do you know where the mouse is? No, I don't know. But it is already present. No, but you are talking of the mouse as a matter, so you feel it, so you can find out. What about the real self? Who says that I don't know real self? That is the real self. Without consciousness, you cannot say whether this is present and this is absent. So we are saying that ignorance here means that real self is present, but it is hiding, and that ignorance has a concealing power.
But ignorance is that we mean that mind and ego have independent existence.
Mind and
ego, have independent existence. It is ignorance.
Mind is ego. Ego is mind. Whether you say mind, memory, intellect, and I thought, this is all we talk about the mind. So when I say I, it is an I thought. It pops up in the mind. The real self has not to say that I am here. Real self has not to say I am here. The sun has not to say I am here. In the presence of the light, I know the sunlight is here. See another way to look at it. Sun is the real self. Reflected medium is the mind. So that mind reflects the light of the consciousness. So where it reflects somewhere else. And that reflection we say I. And that takes birth in the intellect. So we are too far. When I say I don't know, I'm too far from the sun. I don't know. I don't know. Who is saying I don't know? How you are saying I don't know? In the presence of the consciousness, you cannot say. In the absence of the consciousness, you cannot say I don't know. So there is a presence, and that is hidden by the thought process, which I say is the ignorance. So ignorance, that is why we say ignorance is a false notion. That is why we say ignorance. There are two aspects, there are two possibilities. One possibility is that you leave your smartphone at your house. Where is the smartphone? Oh, it is in my house, Then we say it is absence. It is absence. But now you are driving and your phone falls down into the car, and then you start, oh, where is the mouse? Where is the smartphone? Oh, perhaps I left it at my home. And now you stop the car, you open it, and you find the smartphone there. So that ignorance, we are talking of presence of something which is hidden by the force, the power. That is the power of ignorance. Anytime you say I am in stress, so that I am is real self, and the stress is reflected consciousness. There are two I. I am plus I am in stress. That I am in stress is the ego part, the mind, delusion, or ignorance. And that is always there. If I am really in stress, I cannot recognize that I have a stress. So it means there are two entities present. A recognition is there, and knower is there, and that knower is not at all affected. We get carried away by I am in stress, and obviously there the mind and the ego and the thought process and the experiences, they all join together. So I have to understand whether the real self and the supreme self are one. If there is no ignorance, we all are the same. But if there is a ignorance, that ignorance is known as avidya. Avidya. So there is another way to understand. Patanjali understands that, you see the Patanjali in the first chapter, it says, Tada drashtu swarupe avasthanam. Now when you empty the mind of all its contents, the real self is settled in its own nature. Or you can translate that, then I can awaken to my real self. And then he goes on in the second chapter, he says, what is klesha? So we normally cannot join together because our process of thinking is guided by the ignorance. So we cannot club together. What is the klesha and the suffering? Avidya, asmita, rag, dvesh, abhinivesh, pancha kleshah. Real self is not suffering. What is suffering? Avidya, that means ignorance. Asmita, that means ego. Rag, dvesh means attachment and detachment. And abhinivesh means a total attachment, a yearning desire for searching peace outside in the world. So these 5 layers of the ignorance takes over. If we can remove the 5 layers of the ignorance, we find that real self and the supreme self are only one. So in this topic, he takes up that we have to understand that how the real self and the supreme self are one. It's a non-dual consciousness. It is one pure consciousness. Now see that one point. So when I say that ignorance in Eastern wisdom is hiding which is already present, so which is already present, and it is hiding, and because it is hiding, so that is why I do not know. But then the mind and the ego takes the second step. What is that second step? I don't know what you are talking about. I don't know the real self. Whatever I know, that I am the body and the mind. So this is the projection. First, I don't know, it is hiding. So the master says, who is saying that I don't know is the real self. So in the language, we hide that ignorance through our expression. And we start running after the projection. And that projection continues. That projection is reflected in avidya, ignorance, ego, attachment, detachment, and yearning desire to live, searching for peace and happiness outside in the world. And that is why we are not able to recognize our real self, and in turn the real self, because real self, essential nature is my real self, outer nature is the individual self. So I believe that individual self, guided by the ego, mind, and all the experiences, is what is me, and it is still hidden. Without the real self, this false cannot exist. Without the sunlight and the sand, the mirage water does not exist, cannot exist. Without the highway, when I am moving on the highway, the moving experience in my head while driving of the highway does not exist. False is always dependent on the real self. Anything that is false has to be dependent on the real self. But the real self is independent of the false. Real self is independent of the false. It does not depend on the false. And that is what the consciousness is. That is what we are, a non-dual one consciousness. So what happens because of the ignorance, because of the hiding? We see that you said real self is all pervading. I feel myself limited, so I instantly project myself that I am limited with reference to the body. That is the problem. And the seeker says out of the ignorance that you already told me that I am suffering from the 5 layers of ignorance. That is, this sometime it starts on its own. It's a AI camera. Yes, now it's okay. So, so you see that the projection instantly is there. So a seeker has a doubt. With that doubt, the seeker says, "You have already discussed with me that an individual self suffers from five kinds of suffering: ignorance, ego, attachment, detachment, and yearning desire to live seeking permanent peace outside. But the God you already said is permanent, all pervading, always in the state of the happiness." So, what I'm comparing the individual self, the outer nature of myself, not the real nature of myself. So, if I do not remove the false nature, and that is why we have all those practices of Hatha Yoga, Kundalini, breathing, mantra, and all those practices. So once we reach to that state of the purification of the mind, we live in extraordinary awareness. We can see this real self and the supreme self is one. Then individual self is not limited. I am not only inside but outside also. That real self, that consciousness is not only inside but outside also. When I say the space inside the room and space outside, it is one. You cannot say the two are separate. So another level of ignorance, I'm just deviating and then I'll come back, we will talk in detail about it. We normally say that real self lies within the body. That is wrong assumption. That is a false notion. This physical body is located inside the pranamaya kosha. Pranamaya kosha is located inside the manomaya kosha. Manomaya kosha is located inside the Vijnanamaya kosha. Vijnanamaya kosha is located inside the Anandamaya kosha. It is not the opposite. It is not the opposite. We normally say real self lies within me. That is a language we express. It is a language. And I think I already made it clear in one of the practices. When we say we move the mind within, we are rising in awareness. We rise in awareness. One student rightly interrupted me. You are saying that move within me, move within inside yourself, and experience the sensation, comfort, and steadiness. He says, I don't feel any sensation, comfort, and steadiness. I feel the bones. I see the blood is moving. I see my heart. You told me that you move inside. Move inside. So that moving inside is not moving inside the body. So that language, because we cannot use any other language. Language has its limitation. So moving inside simply means the rise in awareness, not fall in awareness. '55 topic tries to understand that how the real self and the supreme self is one. We see the seeming differences. One house is known as a mansion, and other house is known as two-bedroom apartment. What is common in that? Common is the space. Common is the space. You see this, yeah. The common is the space. So we are talking of the intrinsic nature. We are talking of the essential nature. We are talking of the sweetness of a sugar. There may be a differences of the, you can find the sugar in the form of a cube, in the form of a dessert, in the form of a cold drink. But the sweetness, we are talking of that sweetness is present. That sweetness is consciousness. That sweetness is one consciousness pervading everywhere. So now go to the...
When we are doing exercises, so we are in the space, but in the space I'm still aware my form of my body.
Yeah, yeah. We cannot get rid of the false. But here what we can, because without the false I cannot recognize, I cannot make the mind calm. So that is required. Why? What is the false? In the beginning we are saying it is false, and gradually we will say they are the instruments. They are the instruments to help me to evolve. Consciousness is already evolved. It does not need any evolution. We will pick up that. He has picked up those questions in a greater detail. Yes, you are right. You're asking you're making a very good statement in the form of a question. Yes, you're right. Consciousness is the space. I'm not going to change any space. What I'm changing is the wall. What I'm changing is that I'm removing the false notion that this space is enclosed in the wall. I'm removing that false notion. The space cannot be limited. So the consciousness cannot be limited. We are removing that. So what happens, when you have a chain of thoughts like this, you keep on thinking, the time comes, the mind stops thinking. Mind says, I got it. Now the mind has no role to play. Mind says, I got it. And when you continue to live into that state, that is the meaning of awakening. So, Master here introduces there are two types of ignorance. One is the fundamental ignorance. And the second level of ignorance that I just talked about, that it is hidden. Presence is there, but still it is hidden. So two type, we say normally the mool and secondary ignorance. So when there is a superimposition of something over the real self, we say it is one type of ignorance. And the kleshas means the ego, attachment and detachment is there. We say it is the second level of ignorance. Anyone asking you, do you know real self? No, I don't know. That is the fundamental ignorance. But if I live into the fundamental ignorance, I don't inquire, I cannot move into the secondary ignorance. Smartphone is in my pocket, and where I left it? Where I left the phone, and I'm searching everywhere. But if I do not move, let me look into the pocket also. If I have kept it there, so I have to move into the secondary level of the ignorance, then only I can remove it. So the Master is talking about the two levels of the ignorance, and then he will talk in detail about it. Now also see, first level of ignorance, that is how the Master explains. By mistake, I consider the snake as a rope as a snake. Mistaking rope for a snake is an effect of ignorance. In the dusk, I am walking and I see I don't see the rope, but I see the snake. But it is the rope. It is the effect of ignorance. I see now my honey doesn't love me. Effect of ignorance. Why the love? I am the love. Why I am going there? I forget it. So they see, pay attention that you have to contemplate and reflect again and again. First is the effect of ignorance. Effect of ignorance. We are clear? What is the effect of ignorance? That I know it is a snake. And not knowing the rope, that is the cause of ignorance. We are learning science, cause and effect relationship. I have to live into that awareness. Mouse. This is the cause of the ignorance, but the effect in expression. What is the effect in expression? I don't know. Where is the mouse? I see the snake. I see the mirage. Effect of ignorance. Not knowing the sand and the sunlight is the cause of ignorance. Everywhere it lives all the time. So this cause and effect of the ignorance. Now what happens? It says I am. I don't know. So which is this I? This is the ego. The false identification. Then I says, no, I don't know the real self. I know I am the body and the mind. Don't talk about me. Don't talk about the real self. So what is hidden behind it? Why I say that I am the body and the mind? Because I have been experiencing all the pain, pleasure, duality, victory, defeat, profit, loss in the body and mind complex. But why I am experiencing profit and loss? I am attached to the profit, so I say the profit is good. I like it. So we have an attachment and detachment. And that is how we continue our life every day, weeks after weeks, months after months, years after years, and we firmly believe that there is no real self as such. I have to suffer. This is what happens in our life. Because I am still seeing that real self, that I am different from the Supreme Conscious, or I am different from the Supreme Self. So that is why the Master says, the real self with reference to the body-mind complex, the Supreme Self with reference to the body of the God is the world. One is micro, other is macro. So at the micro level, I say it is the real self, it is the same consciousness. The space in my house is the same as this space outside, the infinite consciousness. But I refer the space with reference to my house, so that is what we say it is the real self. And the space with reference to the infinite world outside, we say it is the Supreme Self. So the world outside is the body-mind complex of the real self, of the Supreme Consciousness. Same way this body-mind complex, which we are aware with reference to the real self. Again, go further. The way we have a subtle body, the way we have physical body, so physical body, what appears, the physical, which I can see through my sense organ, is the physical body of the Supreme Self. Don't you see this physical world is so much organized? Earth did not move even an inch from its center. It has to be done by some intelligence. Sun doesn't move. So that is the subtle body of the Supreme Self. Only one thing, that Supreme Self is independent of The physical body, subtle body, and the causal body. We are dependent on it. We identify with. That is the problem. That is the problem. What is the problem? Problem is of ignorance. The Supreme Self is all pervading, one without a second. It has no differences at all, and individual self is limited. There are many. Because they are many, they suffer from the five kleshas: avidya, smita, rag, dvesh, abhinivesh. Many other ways of finding that. So my mind raises the objection every time, even after intellectual understanding. That is why the practice is required. Even we have the higher level of a seeker, we still have an objection. No, I am an individual self. I suffer from these five kleshas, and the God doesn't suffer. How can they be one? So we are not able to see the essential nature. We are caught in the superficial nature. There is an objection and there is a question. He solves it. What is that solves it? Just see that that is how our doubts gets removed. So the seeker says, okay, I can believe you, but tell me one thing. If the Supreme Self is one with I am, real self and the Supreme Self are one. Now I am experiencing pain in the body. Does also the Supreme Self experiences the pain? Because we are one. So what is one has to suffer or has to enjoy the same thing at the same time? What is your answer? Think of this. We will answer that. We have so many unconscious doubts in our mind. Unless those doubts are removed, we cannot reach, we cannot identify ourselves with the Supreme Consciousness. Now I am thinking that I will go to my honey, but why the Supreme Consciousness is not thinking? If you say we both are one. So whatever I am thinking, he has to think, or the Supreme Consciousness is also thinking. That is why I am thinking in the same way. So this master raises this question and then he will answer that question. So master says that practice is important, purification of the mind, upasana, meditation that we are doing. We need a greater focus so that mind do not project any other false notion. But ultimately, this problem of duality, that I am different from the Supreme Consciousness, can only be removed by knowledge. How we get the knowledge? By a proper analysis, by contemplation and reflection. There is no other. Otherwise, I will caught up in hallucinations and I will still live my life with all those hallucinations. And many people are living with it. And that is why they fight. I have this experience and you have this experience. I will take you to that experience which is not at all possible. In the beginning it is possible. Mind will create those imaginations as we give the instructions in the meditation, but gradually it is not. So the master is saying, again, master is saying we see the differences due to ignorance, or which you can say Maya also, causing the superimposition and limitations on the self. One guy was asking me that, so okay, you said that the real self is all pervading and that is me. So once I experience that, once I know and experience that real self, do I really experience the infinite? I said real self is infinite. You don't talk to me that if I eat sugar, should I feel the sweetness? You need not to ask that question too. You are eating sugar, you need not to ask me how it tastes. Instantly, there is an instant awareness, and that instant awareness is known as awakening. Now, the mind is not limiting due to ignorance, it is not superimposing anything. You experience that. And that is why we are doing not only the proper analysis, we are also doing the practices. Again, going back, one is the superficial nature, other is the intrinsic nature. Superficial nature is guided and dictated by the ignorance, by the ego, by the attachment and detachment, by yearning desire to seek peace and happiness outside, because that gives me the sense of incompleteness in me. And ultimately the cycle of the birth and the death continues. And because of these 5 kleshas, according to Patanjali, he also refers Patanjali, I cannot get rid of the false notion that I am the body. That false notion continues. And the ego strengthens the false notion that I am the body and mind complex. Attachment strengthens the ego and it continues to cling with the material objects, situations, conditions, people. Same thing with the detachment. And the abhinivesh, the word is used as the abhinivesh by the Patanjali. The literal meaning of that abhinivesh, that I am sitting in the body. That notion, that false notion, is very hard to drop it. It is so deep. I'm talking, I'm using the body. How can you say I'm not the body? I'm sitting inside the body. Something is coming from inside the body. I cannot. So, because to remove that false notion, we have to purify the mind, we have to do the karma yoga, we have to practice meditation. We can understand this also in many other ways. I'm bringing in some other text I remember. And it is good to take up that topic, this topic. First thing to understand is ignorance has two factors. One, it has a concealing power, and the other factor is the projection power. We should be very clear to understand. The concealing power I express in the form of a thought that I don't know the real self. And the projection power creates a feeling in me that I am not what I am. I am the body-mind complex. Two factors. One is known as can I say absence? Yes, I can say. We have two types of ignorance. Let us say that. Same thing. Same thing. Absence due to something not being present. I left the mouse somewhere else in the other room, so mouse is not here. So I say, is the mouse there? No. And second thing, the mouse is hidden under a notebook. Where is the mouse? I don't see the mouse. You have to contemplate. So one ignorance is due to the absence and other ignorance is due to the presence. Mouse is hidden by something, it is present there. Now I ask you a question. Do you know your real self? You say, I don't know real self, I have not been experiencing it. But who says this? That is the real self. It is hiding behind my ignorance. It is already there. I cannot make a statement. I cannot make a statement without consciousness. And that consciousness is me. It is present here. And still I say I don't know. This master takes us to a journey at a very higher level of intellectual inquiry analysis. Are you getting it? I say, do you know real self? No, I don't know real self. I have never experienced it. So there is a presence of the consciousness which is the real self that is reflecting through the mind and saying that I don't know the real self. Because it is too far. It is thy thought. I'll explain it in a different way, but I remember this, so I thought to pick up this. So we say that ignorance hides the presence of the real self. Ignorance hides the presence of the real self. It is there. And still I claim that I don't know. It hides the presence of the real self. When it hides the presence of the real self. No, I can say, oh, have you seen the Himalayas? No, I have not seen it, the Himalayas. Himalayas is too far. That makes a sense. But I say, do you know your real self? No, I don't know. I don't know. Who says I don't know? Who is saying this? You are saying this. You are the real self. For an object to say or a place to say which is too far, you have not seen, you don't know. That makes a sense. It does not make a sense when I say, do you know your real self? What it demands an extraordinary awareness to become aware of that awareness who says, I don't know the real self. I should not get carried away by the simple thought and then I sit down. No, I don't know real self, don't talk to me. So this master from the Panchadashi he says, just pay attention. So a seeker says, I don't know. What do you understand about the real self? The master is asking. He is another master. He talks in the same language. Now the seeker is saying, I don't know what you are talking about. It does not exist as far as I am concerned. To my knowledge, it is not there. Now the master, so he is creating a situation. The master is thinking to himself. That is strange. I asked the seeker about himself, yet he says he does not know himself. As if I am asking him, where are the Himalayas? Do you know the Himalayas? I am asking about you, and you say I don't know yourself. So there is already a presence of the I, and that presence of the I is pure consciousness, and still you say I don't know. I don't have any experience. Are you getting it?
Yeah, so the I cannot exist without real self, so real self is always exist. So if you ask something, it's of course the real self is stay behind any activity of the mind.
It is so it is hidden behind the activity of the mind. It means there is a presence of the real self. So master is saying to himself, that is a dialogue. Master is saying to himself that this looks very strange. His real self still, reflected through the mind, says that I don't know the real self, and still he does not know it. What more proof is needed to confirm the existence of ignorance? Now we are talking of ignorance. So when I say I don't know the real self, you are in ignorance. That is the proof. That is the way master is taking us to. He is not taking us to the real self now. He is saying that this is what the ignorance is. The moment you say I don't know the real self, you are in ignorance.
But if you say I know real self,
that too is ignorance.
Yes,
that too is ignorance.
Yeah.
Yes, you are right. Yeah, you have gone a step ahead. That too is ignorance. I exist does not need a proof from the mind. So master is going to a step further. Now you see, that is why we say the real self is self-revealing. Now you see, now he comes to that reasoning. Whether I say I know real self, whether I say I don't know real self, it is coming from the mind, but the real self is self-revealing. What is that self-revealing? We talked about it. Mind cannot know the real self. The real self illuminates itself by itself. Now we are coming to that point. So what do you mean by self-revealing? Self-revealing simply means light is on. I can see all the objects in my room in the presence of the light and also the light. So the light is illuminating the light itself. Sun illuminates the sun itself. Sun does not need, I don't need a candle to see if the sun exists or not. The same way, whether you say I know yourself, whether I say I don't know myself, consciousness is revealing. It is a self revealing itself. And that is why we say mind cannot see. Mind cannot see. Self-revealing itself, that is very important. Self-revealing. Self-revealing means illuminating. That the self knows the self by the self. Self does not need the mind. If the mind says I know the real self, it is reflected consciousness. Mind says, I don't know the real self, it is reflected consciousness. But we are focused on, when seeker says, I don't know the real self, it is because of the ignorance. So we have to remove that ignorance. The light bulb illuminates the room, allowing you to see everything, including itself. Self-revealing light, self-revealing consciousness. Presence of the real self due to the ignorance. Ignorance is, we have already seen, is a concealing power of the ignorance. I claim that I don't know the real self. The same thing, I hide the mouse in my hand. Where is the mouse? There is no mouse at all. Or it is hidden behind the notebook. Mouse is present. The real self is present. So when the real self is present and I say I don't know, this is the ignorance. So in one language we say this is the false notion. We don't say it is an absence of the real self. Ignorance. No, do you know German? No, I don't know German. So this is an absence. We are not talking of ignorance in that term of absence. We are talking the ignorance as a concealing power, as a power of concealing, power of hiding. Now you can get the real meaning of asato ma satgamaya. Language is limited. We cannot explain it by language. What is the meaning of asato ma satgamaya? Move from false to real. I have not to move anywhere. I have to know it. That real is present. I see the false. That is ignorance. And that is why we have a second level, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya. So first we have to recognize what is false and what is real. We have recognized. Okay. Now I have to move from ignorance to the wisdom. What is that ignorance? A presence of the concealing power, which is ignorance. So that is why the Master says we need a tremendous faith, pending inquiry. Blind faith, we don't need a blind faith. And then ultimately, this Shanti mantra completes the journey. Asato ma satgamaya. So I have to understand first what is false. For example, it keeps on changing. So what is changing is not me. So that change is perceived by the sense organs and the mind. So it is very clear that I cannot find the real self through the sense organ and the mind, because it only perceives what is changing. You see how many principles come under before I move to the real? Now you can easily understand, a lot of those principles and talks. Oh, that is why we have to understand this. Real self is all pervading, it is eternal, it is beyond the time. Can the mind and the sense organs see what is beyond the time? Answer is no. So you see that, simple one-liner, to understand one-liner, I have to understand lot of things. From moving from the false to the real, we are happy and enjoying in every studio. Oh, asato ma satgamaya. Now you are already into no. It will not work. Tamaso ma jyotirgamaya. And then what happens? Everything changing, I contemplate and reflect, and I reach to a conclusion. You have an old car that is scrapped is death. The same thing, this body becomes old and scrapped to the death. But it is not my death. Mrityurma mritangamaya. Moving from the mortality to the immortality.
But the second line is Tamasuma Jyotirgamaya. It's from the darkness to the light.
Yeah, darkness represents ignorance. It's a metaphorically, darkness, I have to move from ignorance to the wisdom. So initially
repeat the first line.
Asatoma asatgamaya, move from the false to the real. So there I do an analysis, inquiry. I am very clear now what is false and the real. And now I recognize wherever there is a false, there is an ignorance. And then I move to the knowledge. And when I settle into the knowledge, I recognize that there is no cycle of birth and the death. There is no death of me, which is the real self. There is the death of the body. Let it die. Let it live. You see, the entire journey of the Eastern wisdom is complete. You can take even Sarvesham Swastir Bhavatu, you can reach to the same. So these Shanti mantras were written in the very beginning of the Upanishads. They start teaching the Upanishads from these Shanti mantras. You pick up any Upanishad and any of these Shanti mantras, they take you there. So those highest level of a seeker, they can reach to that. And then the teacher repeats this mantra before the seeker because they know this is the truth, they have to explain. And then every Upanishad explains differently. They have a different approach. But the fact is just the same. Either you can say directly, move from ignorance to wisdom, or you can say all the 3 verses, 3 lines, or you can say the real self is the supreme self. Depending on the level, temperament of a seeker who is making an inquiry.